Vladimir Lenin was one of Russia's most influential leaders. He not only affected Russia, but the world. Vladimir Lenin was born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov in Sambrsk on the Volga River on April 22, 1870. His father, Ilya Nikolaevich Ulyanov, was a secondary school teacher and would eventually become a provincial director of elementary education. Lenin's mother was a teacher as well. She taught him how to read, write, and speak French, German, English, and Swedish. Lenin cared about learning and was a very intellectual child, playing chess with his father as a favorite pastime. Lenin's oldest brother, Alexander, was a radicalist and was very into revolution. And after the death of Lenin's father, Alexander was arrested in St. Petersburg for plotting an assassination attempt on Tsar Alexander III. Only 17 years old, Alexander was convicted and hung. Now only 16 years old and the head of a broken household, Lenin would look into books for peace, authors such as Marx, Yugos, and Plekhanov, but mostly influenced by Chernyshevsky. Lenin would later enter Kazan University studying law. Because of his brother, Lenin would become interested in radical ideas. While at Kazan, he joined a revolutionary group, and at one of the demonstrations he was arrested. Accused of being the ringleader, he was expelled from the university. Ministry of Internal Affairs watching him closely, he would eventually return to Kazan to finish his education, but would join another revolutionary circle. Now increasingly interested in Marxism, his mother would buy an estate in Alekhivska village. Here she hoped her son would turn his attention to agriculture. Lenin would study peasant life and the poverty they went through. Lenin's mother would sell the farm due to locals stealing farm equipment and livestock. The Ulyanovs would move to Samara for the winter. Lenin would join Alex P's discussion circle. Here he would adopt Marxism and read a lot of other works.
In 1893, Lenin moved to St. Petersburg, where he worked as a lawyer's assistant. He would rise to the senior position in a Marxist revolutionary called the Social Democrats. By 1894, he was leading a Marxist workers' circle. He made sure he was covering his tracks where he knew the police spies were trying to infiltrate the revolutionary movement. His group would face difficulties with other Marxist circles. Lenin, however, would attempt to ease the tension. He would later travel all over Europe, gathering many literature of Marxists, returning to Russia with illegal revolutionary publications, traveling to various cities, distributing literature to striking workers in St. Petersburg. Because of his involvement in the workers' cause, 40 people, including himself, were arrested and charged with sedition. Lenin was imprisoned and refused legal representation and denied all charges, refused bail, and spent another year in prison before sentencing.
During his time, he theorized and wrote, focusing his attention on the potential of revolution in the working class. He believed the rise of industrial capitalism had created large groups of peasants in the cities, and they would overthrow the Tsar. In February 1897, Lenin was sent into exile in eastern Siberia for 3 years, accompanied by his fiancée. After his exile, he would return to St. Petersburg and would move all over Europe, now involved more in revolution than ever. He would start a newspaper secretly snuck in Russia through the underground. During this time, Lenin would gain followers and form a group called the Bolsheviks, the majority, and their opposition were the Mensheviks, the minorities. In January 1905, a group of protesters were shot and killed. This incident was given the name Bloody Sunday, and it sparked a civil unrest. Lenin saw the opportunity and told the Bolsheviks to take a bigger role. Tsar Nicholas II accepted liberal reforms, and the Bolsheviks were still spreading influence. Finally, in 1914, Russia joined the First World War. Most Russians had lost faith in the leadership ability of Tsar. Government corruption was rampant. Lenin led the February Revolution, which was the first phase of the Russian Revolution of 1917, and could not have come at a worse time. Russia was facing many casualties and had the most casualties of all the nations during World War I. On March 8, 1917, 90,000 men and women protested on streets and clashed with police. On March 10, protesting spread to Petrograd workers, who destroyed police stations and several factories. Regiments opened fire, killing demonstrators. With most citizens losing faith in the Tsar regime, Lenin and Trotsky would lead a revolt in Petrograd on October 1917. The Red Guards, led by the Bolsheviks, began to take over major government facilities. Lenin would later lead an assault on the Winter Palace. They signaled the attack from the Aurora. The Winter Palace's security was inadequate, being guarded by cadets and a women's battalion. The Red Guards, the Bolsheviks, and Lenin took control of the Winter Palace in the early morning. The loss of the support for the war led to the imprisonment of the Tsar and his family, and eventually to their execution by the hand of the Bolsheviks. It was in Yekaterinburg, Russia, a late night on July 16, 1918. Nicholas and his family was awoken and told to dress quickly for a photograph. Instead, they were lined up into two rows and gunned down by a dozen armed men. The survivors of the barrage of bullets would be knifed to death.
Now, with the royal family being killed and monarchy being eliminated from the government, Lenin was free to form a new government to his likings. Lenin was a great believer in political reforms. Lenin and the Bolsheviks believed they had to have a hold on rights in areas that they controlled. This was known as communism. Russia's economy was affected by war. Socialism had not started off on a good note. Lenin became concerned for the poor state of his economy. Lenin decided to improve the poor state of his economy by adapting the new economic policy. The new economic policy stabilized the economy, which began to stimulate industry and agriculture, with market economy which the government did not set prices or wages on. The new economic policy helped the economy prosper. Some socialists believed that the new economic policy had gone too far with its free market economic style. The Cheka was a secret service created by Lenin. The Cheka were used by Lenin to consolidate his power. The Cheka's later objective was to hunt enemies of the state and deal with them. The Kronstadt were a rebellion in 1921. The Kronstadt were angered at the material deprivation and the regime the Bolsheviks were building. A mutiny happened, but both sides overcame this mutiny, and a revolutionary committee was created. Lenin suffered 3 strokes before succumbing to death. The first stroke left him unable to speak and hampered motion in his right side. The second stroke partly paralyzed his left side. The third and final one left Lenin mute and bedridden until his death. After Lenin's death, Stalin would come into power. Even though Lenin didn't trust Stalin, this is due to Stalin eliminating Trotsky, Lenin's true successor.
Even after Lenin's death, the young USSR was growing with an adequate political system and structure, production, agriculture, and industry increasing, and the economy improving greatly. Lenin helped set the USSR for a bright future. Lenin was treated as a godly figure in the USSR, with many statues of him erected, taught about in schools, and having his body preserved and displayed to be viewed by the citizens of the USSR. Lenin is still relevant in modern Russia, despite it now being a republic. This is probably because of the USSR collapsing at the end of 1991. So many Russians still adore him and recognize him as an influential figure. They still have his body on display to this day. It truly shows how Lenin is loved and respected by Russians and still gathers followers even after death.